The war hall of the Combine smelled like victory, which is to say it smelled like fermented sludge ale, scorched meat, and 40 sweating warlords who considered bathing a sign of moral weakness. Stood at the head of the obsidian table, 9 feet of gray-green muscle and gold-plated ego, glaring at the fight card projected above the fire pit like it had personally insulted his mother. The main event is set, he rumbled. The Against the Butcher of the Pits, blood, glory, ratings. He slammed a fist the size of an engine block onto the table. But the opener is garbage. We need a joke, something to warm the crowd, something they can laugh at before the real killing starts. Down the table, a junior warlord named Skarn raised a tusked jaw. We have the human. The hall went quiet in the way halls do when someone says something either brilliant or career-ending. The old one said from the salvage wreck. Picked him up 8 cycles ago, drifting at the edge of our space in a freighter held together with tape and spite. He is small, he is wrinkled, his hair has gone the color of ash. Skarn grinned, showing 70 teeth. Put him in the pit against one of our juniors, the crowd will weep from laughter. Humans expire if you look at them wrong, everyone knows this. Everyone did know this. It was in the intelligence briefings which the Combine compiled with their signature rigor, a single data slate, mostly pictures largely unread. Humans were a quarantined species from a backwater arm of the galaxy, flagged by the Galactic Concord with a designation nobody had bothered to translate. Soft, hairless, fragile, prone to something called lower back pain, which sounded hilarious. At the far end of the table, a smaller cleared his throat. Vex was a lieutenant of no particular distinction except one. He was the only being in the hall who had actually read the human file. All of it, twice. My lord, Vex said carefully, I would advise against this. Turned with the slow menace of a glacier developing opinions. Advise. The file, my lord, there are entries. The humans has a history. There was an event called Vietnam. I do not fully understand it, but the humans who survived it are spoken of by other humans in hushed tones. There is also extensive documentation of a ritual combat narrative called Rocky IV, in which an aged, undersized human defeats a superior specimen through the power of montage. Vex's voice dropped. My lord, they made 5 sequels. The hall erupted in laughter. Someone threw a tankard at Vex's head, wiped a tear from one of his 4 eyes. The joke booking is approved, he declared. Tomorrow the old human fights. Skarn, go tell it the good news. 3 levels below, in a holding cell built to contain creatures that could bend starship hulls, Sergeant First Class Dale Hooper, U.S. Army, retired, was doing push-ups. He was 68 years old and built like a fence post that had survived several hurricanes out of stubbornness. His knees crackled like a campfire. His left shoulder had been rebuilt twice, once by a surgeon and once by a field medic with a stapler and optimism. He did his push-ups anyway in sets of 20 because a man who stopped doing his push-ups started dying, and Dale had penciled that in for some other decade. The cell's observation feed had become appointment viewing among the guards. They watched him fold his blanket into corners sharp enough to draw blood. They watched him take apart his meal tray and reassemble it into something more structurally sound. They watched him sip the brown liquid they provided each morning, grimace and mutter. This tastes like a Radio Shack burned down, which none of their translators could parse and which several guards had begun repeating to each other as a greeting. Mostly they watched him wait. That was the unsettling part, though none of them could have said why. Prisoners raged or wept or bargained. This one waited the way a fisherman waits, comfortable, patient, faintly amused, like the water owed him something and he knew it would pay. The cell door ground open. Skarn ducked through, flanked by 2 guards, and looked down at the small gray creature from an altitude of 4 feet. Human, tomorrow you fight in the grand arena. Before 40,000 of the Combine's finest, you will face a warrior of the in single combat. He waited for the trembling. It will be quick. Try to scream in an entertaining way. Dale finished his push-up set, no rushing, 20 is 20, and stood, rolling his rebuilt shoulder until it popped. He looked up at Skarn with pale blue eyes set in a face like weathered saddle leather, and he smiled. It was a grandfather's smile. It made both guards inexplicably want to check behind them. Single combat, huh? Dale cracked his neck left then right. Winner gets the belt, or is this an exhibition thing? Skarn blinked all 4 eyes. Belt. Championship belt, big gold thing, eagle on it if you're doing it right. Dale bent into a hamstring stretch, chatting like they were in line at a hardware store. Fought smoker matches at Fort Benning back in '81. Ref was blind in one eye and drunk in both. Good times, he straightened. What's the mat situation down there? My knees don't love concrete. You will fight in the mud pit of your ancestors' shame. Mud's fine, mud's good actually. Dale nodded, genuinely pleased, and something in that nod made Skarn's stomach execute a maneuver stomach shouldn't know. Mud slows down big guys. Anything else? Weigh-ins, press conference. Skarn left faster than protocol strictly required. The guards heard the human humming behind them, something jaunty, brassy. a tune the file would later identify as the theme from a human broadcast called Monday Night Football, and they double-locked a door they had never once double-locked. That night, Vex did the thing that would either save his life or end his career. He accessed the human file again, past the pictures, past the physiology summaries, down into the intercepted records the Combine had stripped from the salvage freighter and never examined, because examining things was for cowards. The freighter's logs were wrong. He'd felt it for days and itched behind his third eye. A salvage rig that ancient shouldn't have had a military-grade transponder wired into its distress beacon. A drifting derelict shouldn't have drifted so precisely through 4 patrol corridors past 2 habitable systems directly into the gravity well of the Combines, like a fishing lure dragged slow across a bass pond. And the personnel record. Vex pulled it up and read it properly this time, translating the human military shorthand line by patient line. Subject Hooper Dale R. SFC U.S. Army Ret. Retired, fine, old warriors retire, even the file said humans wore out. But beneath it, a field the auto-translator had skipped because the words were flagged as jargon. Unit affiliation, active. Retired men did not have active units. Vex's talons hovered over the slate. He cross-referenced the term against the intercepted human broadcasts, and the translation assembled itself one cold word at a time, the way avalanches begin. Not a unit designation. A promise. A phrase these particular old humans stitched onto jackets and carved into bar tops and said to each other across decades like a handshake made of iron. We don't leave our people behind. Vex looked at the observation feed. In his cell in the dark, the old human wasn't sleeping. He sat on his bunk with his back to the wall, wrapping his knuckles in strips of torn blanket with the unhurried care of a man setting the table for company. And he was looking directly into the camera, had been, Vex realized with a lurch, for some time, as if he'd been waiting for someone on the other end to finally start paying attention. Dale raised one wrapped hand and gave the lens a small, courteous wave. Then he held up 4 fingers, folded one down, 3, folded another, 2. Counting downs. Vex checked the freighter's transponder log with shaking talons. The distress beacon hadn't been disabled when the Combine took the ship. It had been broadcasting for 8 straight cycles, and 4 hours ago, from somewhere out in the deep black beyond Combine space, something had finally answered. The grand arena of the Combine held 40,000 bodies and exactly 0 fire exits, because evacuating was for species that lost. Banners of conquered worlds hung from the rafters like scalps. The mud pit at the center, 60 feet across, churned to the consistency of regret, steamed under the stadium lights, and above it all, suspended in a cage of gold, the announcer inflated his throat sacs. VORASHCOMBHNI. He thundered from all 8 mouths at once. LLLLETs get ready to GRUMBLLLE. 40,000 throats roared back. Sludgel sloshed. Wagers changed hands in quantities that would have alarmed any species with a functioning concept of financial regulation. And into that wall of noise, through the fighter's gate, walked one old human. Dale Hooper emerged in his salvaged fatigues, sleeves rolled to the elbow, blanket strip wraps on his knuckles, moving with the unhurried gait of a man arriving early for a tea time. The laughter hit him like weather. 40,000 pointing, howling, throwing food. Someone in the 3rd tier held up a sign, freshly translated, expire entertainingly. Dale stopped at the edge of the pit, tested the mud with his boot, and nodded the way he'd nod at a well-kept lawn. Then he sat down on the retaining wall and began his stretches. Hamstrings first, then the hips, then the neck, left and right, with the ratcheting crackle of a man whose cartilage had filed for divorce in 1994. Anybody got? He asked the nearest guard. No, icy hot, nothing. What kind of operation is this? High above in the warlord's box lounged on a throne of fused weapons, watching the ratings feed climb. Beside him, Vex stood rigid, talons clasped behind his back to hide the shaking. He had not slept. He had spent the night drafting a report titled Urgent, recommend immediate release of prisoner, and then deleting it, and then drafting it again, and then remembering what happened to lieutenants who ruined main events. Look at it stretch, chuckled. It thinks it's an athlete. My lord, Vex said about the transponder. After the fight, Vex. The gate on the far side exploded open, and they entered his arena. 11 feet, 1,400 pounds. 40 bouts, 40 kills, a skull necklace he'd stopped adding to because the weight affected his cardio. He hit the mud at a dead sprint, bellowing, and the crowd's roar became a physical thing, a pressure, a tide. Dale stood up, rolled his rebuilt shoulder once, and stepped into the pit. The announcer's sax swelled. Fighters begin. Charged the way he always charged, the way that had ended 40 careers, head low, arms wide, a freight train with a necklace. The crowd leaned in to watch the small gray thing become paste. Dale watched him come with the flat, patient eyes of a man watching a screen door swing. Then at the last half second he wasn't there. A small step, a pivot on the ball of 1 foot, mud sliding under massive boots exactly as mud does, and 1,400 pounds of momentum kept going where Dale no longer was. Dale helped it along with 2 fingers on the back of his elbow, a nudge almost polite. Hit the mud face first at 30 miles an hour and aquaplaned into the retaining wall. The arena made a sound like 40,000 people inhaling at once. "You're telegraphing, son," Dale said, strolling over. "Whole left side announces itself, hips first, then hands." Surged up, swinging a fist the size of a mailbox. Dale slipped inside it, and what happened next occurred too fast for the arena cameras and too slow for to do anything about. A boot behind the ankle, a shoulder into the hip, one blanket-trapped hand guiding the big wrist into an angle wrists were not issued. His own weight did the rest. He went down like scaffolding. Dale rode him into the mud, knee on the shoulder joint, wrist locked, and leaned down close. Tap or nap, big fella, dealer's choice. Undefeated in 40 bouts, discovered a brand new sensation blooming up his arm, a bright, educational agony explaining exactly how tendons worked and how briefly they intended to keep doing so. He slapped the mud twice. 1 minute 51 seconds. The silence was total. 40,000 stared into the pit where their champion lay tapping like a shamed drum, and the only sound in the grand arena was one old human offering a hand up and saying, "Good gas tank, terrible footwork. You ever do ladder drills?" Then the silence broke, and what replaced it wasn't laughter. In the Warlord's box, the ratings feed did something it had never done. It went vertical. Every screen in Combine space was tuning in. Snuckles whitened on the throne. Pride, gambling debts, and a stadium full of witnesses arranged themselves in his mind into a single terrible arithmetic. "Send in the brothers," he growled, "all 3. "My lord," Vex whispered, "the rules of single combat." "I make the rules, Vex." The far gate opened again. 3 fighters this time, leaner than faster, circling wide with chains and hooked poles, spreading out the way pack hunters spread. The crowd found its voice again, uglier now, betrayed and hungry. Dale watched them fan out, and for the first time all night he sighed. It was a deep, put-upon, paternal sigh, the sigh of a man who has asked the boys to play fair and been disappointed. 3-on-1, he said, cracking his knuckles through the wraps, just like Jersey. What followed would be studied by Combine military academies for a generation, mostly in a course titled What Not to Do. Dale took the first brother's chain away and gave it back at speed. He used the second brother's charge to intercept the third brother, introducing them at a combined 40 miles an hour. He employed a banner pole, the retaining wall, the mud, gravity, and at one point the first brother again, wielding him briefly as blunt force equipment. He narrated throughout, elbows in. "ELBOWS in. Son, I am trying to help you," like a furious YMCA coach. And when it was over, 90 seconds later, 3 brothers lay stacked in the mud in what witnesses would describe as an accidentally decorative arrangement. Dale stood over them, breathing only slightly harder than a man who'd taken the stairs. He looked up past the stunned crowd, past the golden cage, directly at the Warlord's box and pointed one wrapped finger at. "Your boys are sloppy," he called, and the arena acoustics carried it to every seat in the house. "Who's next?" And in the box, as Rose bellowing for champions, for war beasts, for anything, Vex finally looked down at the slate trembling in his talons. The transponder report he'd never gotten to deliver, where a new line had just appeared, blinking, patient, in intercepted human code. "Message received, Dale, leave some for US. ETA 26 hours. By the 3rd hour, had bet the treasury." It happened the way avalanches happen, one pebble at a time, then all at once. First his personal fortune, wagered against the syndicates to recoup the disaster. Then the war chest. Then in a moment he would replay for the rest of his life the Combine's entire strategic reserve staked on a single proposition, that somewhere in his empire existed one fighter who could put down a 68-year-old human with bad knees. "Bring the champions," he commanded, "all of them." They came, the arena's night stretched into legend, and the ratings feed stopped displaying numbers and simply displayed the word all. The Reaver of Prime came first, 7 feet of blade-dancing vassal world royalty, undefeated across 3 systems. Dale fought him tired, visibly theatrically tired, shoulders slumping, breath ragged, an old man finally hitting his limit. The Reaver, smelling glory, abandoned his footwork and lunged for the finish, and learned, in the sudden reversal that followed, that Dale Hooper had been playing possum with the shameless commitment of a man who'd once faked a heart attack to win $20 off his brother-in-law. The Reaver woke up 40 minutes later asking about a woman named Brenda. Nobody knew any Brenda. The twin scourges of the Ninth Fleet came next, and here the arena witnessed something stranger than defeat. Midway through the bout, Dale stopped fighting and started teaching. No, plant your foot when you pivot, you're giving me your whole spine." The younger scourge, bewildered, planted his foot. His next strike was the best of his career. It missed, but it was the best of his career, and Dale spent the following 90 seconds exploiting the exact lesson he'd just taught, beating the scourge with his own improvement like a man being defeated by his tuition. In the stands, 40,000 experienced a collective, complicated feeling their language had no word for. The closest translation was, "Then sent the war beast." The gates at the arena's far end, the big gates, the ones with the warning glyphs, ground open, and out of the darkness came 6 tons of armored murder. A hound, all tusks and earplates and rage, starved for 2 days per regulation. The crowd's roar turned uneasy. Even for the Combine, this was less sport than execution. Dale looked up at the beast towering over him. The beast looked down at Dale. Its nostrils flared, reading him no fear stink, no aggression, just an old mammal standing calm in the mud, radiating the specific patience of a creature that had raised 3 kids, 4 dogs, and 1 profoundly stupid horse. "Hey, big fella," Dale said softly, "who's a good boy?" 6 minutes later, the deadliest war beast in Combine inventory was on its back in the mud, all 4 legs paddling the air, making a sound like a diesel engine purring, while Dale scratched behind its earplates and told it in full view of 40,000 witnesses and an estimated 9 billion viewers that every dog was a good boy, even a 6-ton one. Yes, he was. Yes, he was. The beast's handler quietly turned in his resignation from the edge of the pit. The Combine crowd broke. Not into rage, into love. It started in the cheap seats where a cluster of younglings appeared wearing gray beards of woven moss. Then the chant, low and rhythmic, spreading tier by tier like a rumor made of sound, "Old man, old man, old man." Vendors began selling blanket strip hand wraps at criminal markups. Somewhere in the 4th tier, a banner unfurled, HIPS first, then hands. Between rounds, Dale held court at the pit wall. He'd adopted his guard detail somewhere around the 5th bout, and now they crowded around him like nephews. He taught them 5-card draw using armor rivets as chips and cleaned them out twice. He complained about his knees with the epic sweep of a man reciting the Iliad. He told them about the 1985 Chicago Bears in such reverent detail that 2 guards would later petition, unsuccessfully, to legally change their names to. And through the player's gate, carrying a medkit he had no authorization to carry, came Vex. He didn't announce his defection. He simply appeared in Dale's corner between rounds, wordlessly holding water and clean wraps, his career and probable collapsing behind him like a bridge he'd chosen to burn. Dale looked at him for a long moment, at the shaking talons, at the data slate clutched to his chest like a confession. "You read the file," Dale said. "It wasn't a question." "All of it," Vex whispered, and twice. "Smart kid," Dale held out his hands for the fresh wraps. "Stick with me, keep the water coming, and when the time comes and you'll know it, get down." Above them, the galaxy was leaning in. Rival empires had hijacked the broadcast. The hegemony of was watching. The Silicate Choir was watching. Ambassadorial shuttles were entering orbit uninvited, claiming diplomatic interest in the sporting event. And at the Galactic Concord's monitoring station, a duty officer looked at the feed, went pale in all 6 of her faces, and escalated to her supervisor because the broadcast had just tripped the oldest standing flag in the Concord's registry. "Species human, designation quarantined, do not engage." Saw none of it, saw only the pit, the old human, and the smoking ruin of his treasury. Ruined warlords did not retire, they were retired. He had one move left, and he played it, the banned one, the cyber gladiator sealed beneath the arena since the armistice, the thing even the Combine had agreed never to wake. As the floor of the pit began to split and hydraulic screams rose from below, Vex grabbed the data slate and did what he should have done a day ago. He forced it into his hands. "My lord," read it. And for the first time read, the transponder logs, the freighter's impossible drift threaded through 4 patrol corridors like a lure. The personnel file, Hooper D. retired, unit affiliation active, and the final line, the fresh intercept, timestamped 25 hours ago. Message received, Dale, leave some for US. The ale curdled in stomach. He wasn't lost, he said slowly, the arithmetic assembling itself in his skull with the weight of falling masonry. The wreck, the drifting, he steered it here, he chose us. He looked down at the pit where the old human stood wrapped and ready, watching the floor split open with the mild interest of a man watching a neighbor's garage door. This was never a capture, it was an invitation. Why? On the pit floor, as if he'd heard, and later, Vex would swear he had, Dale Hooper looked up at the warlord's box, tapped the side of his nose and pointed straight up. That was when every proximity alarm on the planet went off at once. The sky above the grand arena tore open. Not metaphorically. The cloud layer split along a seam of superheated air, and through it descended something the Combine's defense grid had already stopped shooting at, partly because its point defense had swatted every missile like slow flies, and mostly because the ship was broadcasting. Music. Brass-heavy, swaggering, 40 years old and utterly without mercy, played at a volume that rattled fillings on the planet's far side. The Combine's intelligence archives would eventually identify it as a human anthem titled Thunderstruck. The vessel itself was a retrofitted assault carrier, hull like an old boxer's face, and painted across its bow in letters 40 feet high. USS Take It Easy. Beneath that, smaller in stenciled white, VFW Post 2549 Mobile. 40,000 sat frozen as the carrier parked itself directly over the arena with the casual entitlement of a taking two spaces. Landing craft detached, a dozen of them, dropping fast, and its remaining champions, his guards, his entire military apparatus braced for the storm that 8 cycles of blood sport had earned them. The lead craft slammed down in the mud pit, its ramp fell, and out of the smoke and thunder walked the most feared boarding party in the galaxy, 11 human beings whose average age was 71. They wore powered armor over Hawaiian shirts. One used the barrel of a plasma cannon as a walking stick between shots he hadn't needed to fire. A broad woman with steel gray hair and a jacket reading MONTOAA, door gunner, 3 wars, 0 patients surveyed the arena and announced, to no one and everyone, "Parking on this planet is a disgrace." The man on point was huge in the way old barns are huge, weathered, and load-bearing. His name tape read GRIGGS. He stomped through the mud, scanning the tiers of frozen aliens, the stacked champions, the war beast now trotting at Dale's heel like a 6-ton retriever, and finally found Dale himself standing at the pit center, arms crossed. 26 hours, Dale called. "I said leave some for you, I didn't say take the scenic route." "Had a cardiology appointment," rumbled. "We don't skip appointments, you know this." He racked his weapon with a sound like a door closing on an era, and 11 barrels rose toward the warlord's box in a single geriatric immaculate motion. Now, which one's the management? 40,000 inhaled. Stood alone in his box, treasury gone, champion stacked planet, and did the bravest thing of his life, which was simply to remain standing. And Dale Hooper said, "Stand down." The words dropped into the arena like a stone into still water. 11 barrels hesitated. Dale said in the aggrieved tone of a woman who had ironed her good Hawaiian shirt for this, "They put you in a pit." They did. Dale walked slowly to the center of the mud, boots squelching, and turned in a full circle, taking in the tiers, the moss-bearded younglings, the HIPS first banner, the guards who owed him poker money, Vex clutching his medkit like a shield. "And for 8 days I've been living with these people, watched them, fought their best." He looked up at, "You know what I found? Heart. Bad footwork, criminal footwork, but heart." He raised his voice to carry, and it carried like it had carried across parade grounds for 40 years. "I steered that wreck here on purpose. You want to know why, Warlord? Because the Conquered flagged you next. Quarantine, blockade, then the hammer, same file they keep on us. I've seen what the hammer does, so I came to take your measure first, see if you were worth the alternative." The arena held its breath, lowered his weapon 1 grudging inch. "Here's the deal," Dale said. "One-time offer, no lawyers. Every prisoner in Combine space goes free today. The blood circuit closes the killing part. And in exchange," he smiled, and the smile was the grandfather one, the one that made stomachs misbehave, "you get what you actually want. A rematch, formalized. Humans versus Combine, real rules, real referees, nobody dies. And I'll train your fighters myself, because son, somebody has to, and the Conquered doesn't blockade its sparring partners." Stared down at the small gray creature standing unarmed in the mud with 11 guns at its back and an empire at its mercy, offering, of all the weapons in the galaxy, a hand up. Wise voice cracked across the silence. "We caged you, mocked you, why offer us anything?" Dale's answer was quiet, but the acoustics were merciless, and every soul in the arena heard it. "Because 40 years ago somebody offered me a hand when I'd earned a fist, been paying it forward ever since. That's the whole file on us, Warlord. That's the thing your intelligence never translated." He extended his blanket-trapped hand upward, absurd and unwavering. "Deal or not?" Last of his treasury and first of his line to lose to a pensioner descended from his box. He crossed the mud that had swallowed his champions. And before 9 billion viewers, 40,000 witnesses, and 11 heavily armed retirees, he knelt, because the human's hand was very far down, and shook it. The arena detonated. "Old man, old man, old man," the war beast howled, fired her cannon straight up in celebration, then apologized to nobody. Vex sat down in the mud and quietly began to weep into his medkit, and Dale patted his shoulder and said, "Told you you'd know when to get down." 1 year later, the grand arena smelled like popcorn. The first annual Combine Human Invitational sold out in 9 minutes. Banners of 40 worlds hung from rafters that had once held scalps, and in the pit, matted now regulation with actual fire exits, a young fighter executed a flawless hip pivot takedown as 40,000 fans and 1 former door gunner screamed approval. The worked pads in the far corner. The hound wore a foam finger on 1 tusk. Dale Hooper watched from a lawn chair at pit side, cooler at his elbow, whistle around his neck. Beside him stood Vex, in a cap stitched with the single-word coach, holding the clipboard like a sacred text. "Footwork's better," Vex offered. Footwork's acceptable, Dale said and cracked open a cold one. We'll get there. Far away in the marble halls of the Galactic Concord, a tribunal reviewed the year's most irregular file. Stood before them, leaner now, wearing a jacket with a post number on it that no could yet explain, and gave the testimony that would be quoted across the galaxy for 100 years. You ask if we regret engaging the quarantine species, he straightened. We were ordered to fight an old human in an arena as a joke. We regret ever going, not because we lost everything we did, but because now he makes us do cardio at 5 in the morning. A pause. Ladder drills, your honors, ladder drills. The Concord ruled the matter closed. The file was stamped and sealed, all but the last line, added by hand in Dale's own writing. Hips first, then hands, then friends.